This is a 1979 RD400F.
How did it change for its lifespan?
Well, this was the end of the line of the actual model before the LCs come in, the liquid-cooled Yamahas. They started off back in the early 70s as a YDS7 and a YR5. The YDS7 was a 250 and the YR5 was a 350. That moved on to the RD range, which became the RD250 and the RD350. They did vary quite a lot cosmetically from these bikes. They had a pear-shaped tank, there was instrumentation difference, the braking systems were different. And then in the mid-70s they actually changed it to the range you've got now basically. They started off with the A and the B and the C. The C version was when they introduced the what we know as the coffin-shaped tank version, which then moved on to the D model. And then we went on to the E and the F. The final year of production, 79-80, was the F model, to which this is one.
Have you owned one of these bikes before?
Well, before I got into my LCs, basically this was the bike I got after I had my Fizzy. I didn't actually have a 400, I had an RD250 DX. That varied from the 400 obviously with the larger engine capacity, but as I say, my first bike was the RD250 DX. Same shape physically as this, and it's got a few fundamental differences, because when they changed to the E model, they actually uprated it to a certain aspect with adding things like electronic ignition. Cast wheels were obviously like in by this time. They come in with the D model. The downpipes they had tapered. The braking system, the front and back brake calipers changed. There was a few other slight modifications with regards to the graphics. I mean, other differences that varied from the coffin tank version, from the C model, for example, was the earlier ones had wire wheels, and also the seat on the C model didn't have the plastic seat cowling at the back. The clocks were a different layout as well, and obviously it had the points ignition as opposed to the electronic ignition, which this one benefits from. The difference between the E and the F model, this was the colour scheme of the E and the F model. This and competition yellow was one of the other ones, the main ones, which people probably will remember, although they did have the colours as well. They had the blue one, they had the silver one. The E model come with black wheels, and the F model came with red wheels. Although these wheels are red, these have actually been painted and they're not actually correct, because the outer edges of the wheels on this model have been totally painted, so there's no silver stripe showing on the actual wheel spokes, so to speak. And one of the other differences between the E and the F models was the F model had dogleg levers, whereas the E model didn't. I think there was a slight alteration as well to the ignition timing. I'm not too sure about that, but I'm of the opinion that that was the case.
Did you restore this one yourself?
I actually bought this bike back in 1998. I drove it home, and within sort of a day it was basically stripped down to nothing. The normal things I had done to it was I had the frame powder coated, the swinging arm, all the ancillary bits. I had the decision that I probably was going to restore it to the extent that as I would have wanted it back in like the early 80s. As I say, I had a blue DX model in the early 80s, and on that I had the all-speed expansion chambers. I did experiment with different handlebars. I had the flat bars, which this model's actually got on there at the moment. I did experiment with clip-ons. I didn't get on too well with the clip-ons, to be honest with you. One of the problems I found with having the clip-ons on it was that you couldn't have your wing mirrors on, and I actually got caught speeding because I didn't have no wing mirrors, and apparently the policeman was following me for a mile and a half and I knew nothing about it. So that was my one and only experience with clip-on handlebars. But as far as restoration's concerned, I mean, yes, I did actually. It wasn't a nut and bolt rebuild where all bolts and nuts were replaced. I did clean a lot of them up. Basically, it was going to be a usable classic. So that was back in '98. It took me to about, again, I wasn't working on it all the time. It took me to about 2001, I suppose, before it was actually back on the road again. And it's not really been used since then, because I've got 3 other bikes. The Yamaha 350 LCs, I've got a couple of them, and I've also got a 350 LC which is in bits, and I've also got a YZF 750. But I mean, this is basically a pure nostalgia run for me as well, pre-LC era.
What parts are hard to get?
Well, one of the reasons why I didn't actually restore it to standard was because certain parts of these are very, very hard to get. One of the parts which is basically the most elusive part, it took me about 2.5 years to find one, it is actually the rear mudguard. I was lucky enough to actually find one on one of the websites I visit, and again, there's so many people leaving messages for rear mudguards for this model, and they can command well over 100, maybe even £200. And when you think the mudguard, the rear mudguard is the actual chrome section is only about that long. I mean that you know, a lot of you do find they do come up, but even second-hand ones that are rusted and damaged actually hold their price, because so many RDs back in the day had their rear mudguards removed as a way of making the rear end look a bit more sportier. But as I say, that took me like a good 2 years to find it. And eBay obviously is a place which you do search. And the trouble with eBay is that when you're looking for parts on there, everybody else is looking for the same part, and that tends to push the prices up. So being a member of a website discussion forum and making friends among these people can actually you can do deals and get the parts you want more accessibly than using possibly eBay. One of the other parts which is hard to get as well is the actual original seats. Again, I've got the 2.4 seat on here, which again I had this on not this actual seat, but I had a 2.4 seat on my original 250 back in the early 80s, and so obviously, I mean, I wanted to reproduce the look which I probably had back then. Now, to buy one of these new, that was a brand new seat I found, and to buy one of them new, you can pay £150, £200 if you can still find them, because these are very hard to get hold of. One of the benefits I've found with refurbing this bike to non-standard condition was that you didn't have to worry too much about the hard to find parts. So normally the normal seats are quite hard to find. The rear mudguards, the front mudguards, you can still find them. Centre stands, although this one hasn't got the centre stands because I've got the all-speed expansion chambers on this. These are the Formula 3 ones, the ones that actually swing right underneath the centre of the bike, which means you obviously have to take the centre stand off. The older, the other type of all-speeds you get do run along the sides, and I think you can actually retain the centre stands with them ones. One of the other differences with the DX model and the E and the F model is the way that the footrests are fixed to the frame on this model. You'll probably see that the footrests are attached above the actual expansion chambers or the exhaust pipes, whereas on the earlier models the footrests are actually fitted to a bracket which swung underneath the pipes. It was possible to, if you had a 250, and I actually did do this back in the day, if you had a 250, it was possible to actually put the 350 heads and barrels off of the RD350B model, which basically increased your engine size, because the actual stroke of the engine was exactly the same. 54. The bore and stroke of a 250 was 54 by 54, and the bore and stroke of an RD350B, for example, was 54 by 64. So basically the stroke of the engine was the same, it was just the barrel size that increased. One of the things you would have to have done as well, which I did at the time, was increase the jet size. I think I lifted the needles because I had a tuned top end on my 250 at one stage, and I also put the RD400 oil pump. But one of the things that did tend to happen when you was going along at about 6,000 revs, if you'd converted your 250 to a 350, was that you used to get terrible vibration through your handlebars. This was basically due to the fact that you've put an imbalanced top end on, and it was a rigid bolted engine into the frame, and hence the vibration at a certain rev range used to come and travel through to your hands. And if you was cruising along with the revs at around 6,000 revs per minute, you used to get a lot of very tingly hands and feet. And that is why the actual engine in the RD400, because again that's a similar size bore diameter and the stroke's different, so it's not equal like the 250, and as a result of that the RD400 engine is actually rubber mounted. So one of the problems that you used to get with converting these to a 350 was the terrible vibration. you go. Lovely bikes. And I wish I could have got it running. I did sell it not long after that. It was only firing on one cylinder. The carbs needed clearing out, and that's why we didn't actually hear it running properly. And if you probably heard, it weren't running on both cylinders correctly anyway. But anyway, there we go. That's another one in this series of two-stroke classics from the 1970s to the 1980s. And don't forget to check out the other ones in this series as well, and also the mopeds as well. So don't forget, rate, comment and subscribe if you like these videos, and we'll see you again in the next video. Bye for now.